Hello, everyone. Today we're joined by Lukas, who is based in London and is an active member of the effective animal advocacy movement in several European countries. As the head of research of Healthier Hens, he will be responsible for coordinating all of the organization's research activities and will also share communication, engagement, and fundraising opportunities. Today, we're going to talk about Healthier Hens. And I think the first question to start us off is just, what is it all about?
Yeah, of course. Thanks so much, Karthik. Healthier Hens was a charity idea that was incubated by charity entrepreneurship. They did some background research looking into promising interventions within the animal welfare space. And one of them was looking closer at the feed quality that egg-laying hens receive. So as you might imagine, them being bred to produce so many eggs have a really big toll on their bodies. Like they need a lot of nutrients to really, maintain their health and welfare. And there was like a suspicion that the quality of the feed might be at the balance, between pharmaconomics and what's really good for the hen. So we're seeing that there is a big gap between those two things, right? There is let's say, a mismatch where a hen can still produce quite a lot of eggs, but her health is deteriorating at a certain level of feed quality. So essentially, Healthier Hens is trying to figure out if there's any cost-effective ways, right? Ways that we can, like, let's say, maximize how much of welfare is improved by $1, let's say, through looking into how we can make sure that this welfare or this, feed quality essentially is at the level that's conducive also to the well-being of the hen.
Yeah, and we've seen recent efforts to have production of eggs go cage-free in places like the US, for instance, and there are a lot of corporate commitments that are being made. And my question is, are the dietary needs of hens becoming greater as more production goes cage-free?
That's a great question. I mean, just to kind of echo what you're saying, right? For us, is also very clear. The first step is really to get the hens out of the cages, because that's just really, really bad on welfare for, on so many levels. So after the hens are out, let's say there's, of course, two different housing systems, essentially, right? It could be cage-free, but where the hens are still inside, like a big barn, or it could be free range, where they're also allowed to have access to the outside. So irrespectively, it seems that when the hens have more space and more opportunity to like exercise, move around, exhibit their natural behaviors, they also tend to eat more, right? So we're definitely seeing that hens that are cage-free are consuming more feed. And in relation, that also makes the balance of nutrients shift a bit. So even though, for instance, the hens might need the same amount of, let's say, vitamin D or some other nutrient, since they're consuming more of the feed, the concentration of that nutrient has to be adapted. And I mean, fortunately, poultry or like animal nutrition is quite a wide studied area. But of course, typically what the companies are doing, they're trying to maximize productivity. And as I mentioned, like welfare can be, like a secondary objective often. So we're just trying to make sure that welfare is not forgotten. And that's really one of the topics that is still being developed, throughout interventions. Yeah.
Yeah, and are there already existing incentives for farmers to want to fortify feed for egg-laying hens? Maybe because enriching their feed with calcium would help lay better eggs because egg laying as a process depletes the calcium stores of the egg-laying hens.
Yeah, so you have a really good point. You've kind of hit the nail on the head, as they say. Of course, a certain level of nutrition is necessary for the hens to keep laying, right? Typically, we're seeing that, let's say, egg-laying hens in these commercial systems, they live up to 2 years, right? So that means that, they're laying for an extended period of time. And of course, that nutrition, that basic nutrition has to be there for them not to collapse and develop severe nutritional deficiencies. But as you might imagine, there is that kind of balance. What's the minimum that can be done while still having high productivity, and what's really good for the animal? So we're just trying to bridge that gap. and really to focus on, how can we help the farmers integrate welfare into, what they really care about. And there has been some initiatives, trying to encompass this like one welfare aspect, right? Where, as we want everyone to have a good well-being at the end of the day, right? Even the consumer, even the farmer, and of course the animal as well. So the theory goes there that, kind of like, to simplify it, I guess, a happy animal is a happy farmer, is a happy consumer, right? Because we all deep down care about the well-being of the animals. It's just typically the economics that play into it, right? If the market is very challenging, so for instance, if you have a huge farm next door that is caged, for you it will be really difficult to kind of stay afloat while caring about welfare, while caring about all those things. So the kind of like the market disbalance is one that's like a big limiting factor. But we're definitely seeing that among cage-free farmers, they have this more progressive kind of view on welfare, and they definitely want to incorporate it. It's just that kind of like, how to make it feasible, how to make sure that the farmer's, let's say, well-being is not put at risk.
Yeah, and how do you go about deciding what country you want to operate in? We've seen that like in certain countries there might be a greater need for fortification than others, but how do you decide that?
That's a great question. It actually was our first project as a, let's say, team, right? We joined up after the incubation program, and our kind of like, the big main objective was, how do we choose a country where to pilot in, right? Where to test it. And it took us like, I think, 5 to 6 months to really make that final decision. And in the end, it was obviously a combination of tactics, or how to come to this decision, a well-informed decision. Obviously, this is an issue that is quite widespread on all the continents. In probably most of the countries, you would see some sort of issue with feed quality. But among our like key criteria was not just how big is the issue, not just how many animals are affected, but also we tried to look into, how feasible is it to implement something like this? Is there like ongoing animal welfare movement? Is there any other group that's working towards that? And in the end, it was a tricky choice, of course, but let's say, just to mention a couple of key factors for us, the growing cage-free movement is one that was really important for us, because as I mentioned, for us, it's kind of like the baseline. We only work with cage-free farms. So as an example, maybe relevant, we were considering India, of course, as one of the countries because of how many animals are involved. But cage production is just so ingrained, so deeply widespread in the country, that we saw, in collaboration with other NGOs, that actually by us entering, it might put their efforts at risk. And they, cage-free efforts could be slowed down by us kind of like, let's say, just kind of accidentally competing, because we're trying to, improve the health of hens, but we don't want to the previous momentum to kind of trickle down and slow down. So that was one of the key factors. And then, of course, we were looking for countries that had a history in animal welfare. So since our kind of end goal was to scale and make sure this reaches like the policy level, the regulations and standards. In our case, for instance, Kenya looked like a very promising country because it had previous welfare laws. It had many international NGOs trying to get and improve, well-being in that region. And we saw that it could have like positive flow-through effects, kind of like a domino effect, right? If we could get Kenya to improve the standards, it could like fall down and spread easier across the region, because it's a country that's being looked up to, right, in terms of well-being, both for farmers and animals.
Yeah, and I've read that Healthier Hens has conducted farmer workshops in Kenya. Is factory farming and the needs different in Africa than other continents? I know that your criteria was definitely looking at where there's a lot of cage-free production. And one thing that definitely was interesting is that in Africa, you actually have the highest percentage of laying hens in indoor cage-free systems.
Yeah, and it's one fact that's not vocalized enough, I would say, because it's true. I mean, so many different smallholder farmers and even like medium-sized farmers choose to go that route, I must say that it's not always due to, you know, well-being and animal welfare. It's just often a cheaper solution. But we definitely see that, you know, there is industrial interest in bringing cages to Africa, and it is spreading slowly. So we kind of thought that perhaps it's a good opportunity to cut it while it's still growing, you know. But yeah, just to kind of bring it back, there's definitely a lot of interest in cage free production. In our workshops, we do see that farmers care about the health and well-being of their farms. I mean, hens on their farms, and they do want to improve the conditions. It's just, as I mentioned, it's economically quite challenging, especially when the consumers are not quite there yet, right? They're not like actively demanding for cage-free eggs like it is in Europe and some other places. So that's kind of challenging, and yeah, there are missing pieces here and there. But I think by supporting the progressive farmers, the ones that are really interested in welfare to begin with, I think that could be a strong factor that kind of strengthens the right way of doing it, right?
Yeah, and why might farmers be apprehensive and afraid of wanting to provide fortified feed? What are some of the difficulties in getting them to actually do it?
So it's yeah, I mean, from our investigations, it seems like quite a complex issue. First of all, is the, let's say, more straightforward, just the cost, right? Whatever higher quality product you would want to get, it's always something you would have to pay for, and it's typically quite on the edge of the profit margins of the smaller farmers. So that's one that's definitely deterring some. And then the second thing is actually the issue of actually ensuring that the feed quality is high as proclaimed on the label and consistent throughout the year, because in Kenya and several other countries in the region, there were severe shortages of key ingredients in the feed due to, you know, all kinds of droughts, and even the war in Ukraine. It had very, let's say, widespread effects that kind of made some of these producers compromise on quality just so that they could, you know, keep producing and selling. So let's say even a farmer wants to get a specific quality of the feed, it's not always easy for them to do so, because there is some, let's say, general mistrust among the smaller producers of feed, because they might, you know, manipulate some of the production. Not every producer has a certification to actually sell, be in the market, but enforcement of the standards is very difficult. So there's definitely quite a lot of like intertwined issues, even when, you know, the farmer would decide to go for a higher quality product. But in the end, I mean, for the farmer, I would say it's definitely the cost.
Yeah, and are there efforts underway to reduce those costs? Are you considering like subsidizing some of the fortified ingredients, getting governments to do this as well?
That was definitely one approach that we thought, especially, you know, in the beginning, that might make it a bit easier to scale and reach more farmers. So that's something that we would consider, of course, in the beginning, just to kind of subsidize the difference, you know, between like a cheap cheap feed and then like a more expensive high quality feed. But again, we're not quite there yet to be scaling like that. And in the end, it would be a policy ask. So in the end, we would try to pursue that all the producers are at the same playing field. You know, all of them have to comply to a standard. So in the end, that should kind of level the playing field a bit, and you know, there you wouldn't see that big of a difference in terms of the selling prices of the feeds when everyone has to comply with the standards, right? So yeah, those are, let's say, the two approaches. But in the end, to kind of achieve scale, subsidization is really out of the question, because it gets really expensive really fast. So in the end, it would be some sort of a collaboration between the, you know, standard bodies or regulators who would be able to incentivize and really help the manufacturers to attain that high quality that everyone's seeking.
Yeah, and you mentioned that you only wanted to operate in cage-free farms because you didn't want to, take space away from other animal welfare groups that are trying to get more cage-free commitments from corporations. Is there still a worry that increasing feed fortification can lead to hens being more profitable to rear because they're healthier and fewer deaths mean fewer costs for the farmer? Like potentially that could lead to more chickens being farmed because fewer are dying and like more people want to do it because they're not dying if their like feed is really high quality.
Yep. Again, Karthik, I have to say you're well prepared. Great questions. It's something that we're constantly thinking about and considering, and it is one of the, let's say, leading worries, right? So, kind of like the net effect on the welfare, right? So we can imagine several scenarios where, for example, if due to better feed, farmer economics improve and the profits are higher, you could imagine that perhaps next year the farmer will buy more hens, but keep the same structure, meaning that the stocking density would increase and you would have other welfare issues. And then you would have to consider, well, was this a net benefit or net, decrease in welfare? So it's definitely one that we're still thinking about, and it is a big issue. So it's something that we need to consider. But again, we still don't have data that would show that such an increase would be significant, mainly because, as I mentioned, the feed producers and the poultry genetics companies, they have been working and doing research on this, how to make sure that the bird is as productive for as long as possible. So they kind of really know that pretty well by now. So even if we, let's say, improve the feed beyond what's optimal, we wouldn't see, let's say, significant effects in terms of disease rates or something like that. I mean, it depends on the farm, of course, because there's so much variation. But in general, what you would see is that, as let's say if this is quality, or let's say this is productivity. So when you start to improve the feed, you would get like an incline in productivity, but at some point it plateaus, right? So you could give like the best feed possible and you would not get more eggs per hen. So that's something that we want to reach, of course. But welfare keeps going up a bit higher, right? Because as people, we definitely enjoy higher quality food. So it's the same for the hens, that this mismatch keeps popping up, right? Right now, everything is optimized for as many eggs per hen as possible. That's kind of like the bottom line. Whereas we want to make sure that the hen is as healthy and her welfare is maintained throughout this process. So it's in the end, it will be a balance, as it is with everything. And we're just trying to figure out if there's a cost-effective way to do this. First of all, of course, to test it, and as you rightly say, analyze and measure these potential negative flow-through effects. So one of them is, of course, the impact that our activities could have on the work of other NGOs, as it is with the cage-free work. But otherwise, there's also some potential flow-through effects that we need to look out for. And that's one of them is, of course, this, that could better feed improve, or let's say increase farmer profits so much that they would choose to kind of compromise on welfare the next production cycle. So for this, like I really look up to Fish Welfare Initiative, who are combining their asks in a way where there's like a standard, right? You improve certain things, you get support for improving your systems, but at the same time you also commit to not let's say compromising on welfare, right? So if this is like a limit on stocking density or something like that, that's, I think, very reasonable and yeah, just really laudable, I would say.
Yeah, I really think I liked your point on how even if we do increase feed fortification, it'll start plateauing over there at that point. So this idea that it's just going to lead to more farming of chickens is untrue. I think that the incentive for a lot of these farmers to be more profitable exists regardless. And so this is basically a way to make sure that we can use that profit incentive in a way that helps the chickens. Because if we didn't fortify their feed, the farmers would instead try to resort to something else that would still help them be profitable. So, for example, they could rear more chickens because they think that 10 to 30% will die anyways. And so that might mean that they want more chickens, and that would be much worse. And so this is a way to actually reduce that. So, I was just thinking through like these different scenarios, and I do think a lot of the work is definitely promising and will have a really good positive impact. I wanted to now talk a little bit more about, you mentioned the Fish Welfare Initiative. So I just did an interview with them today, and one of the things that I learned was that, and it's pretty shocking, is that for fish feed, often it is pelleted feed that comprises of fish oil and fish meal. And so do you think that fortifying, the feed that we give to fish might reduce the need to use fish as the ingredient to farm fish?
That's a tricky one. We're seeing the same with chicken feed in Africa. One of the common ingredients is the same fish oil or fish flakes, as they call it, or like bone meal, right? Like residues from other animal farming operations and slaughterhouses. So we're definitely seeing that. In the case of, let's say, Kenya and the feeds there, as I mentioned, it depends so much on the availability of ingredients. And in the end, what most of these feed producers do is they use what's called a least cost formulation. So essentially, they want to ensure that the quality is there, and then they kind of freely navigate between the ingredients to make up that composition. So let's say if there was a bad season or a dry season and you don't have corn or soya, many of these producers will turn to other protein sources or other ingredients, and that often includes all kinds of byproducts of animal factory farming. So it is a very intertwined issue, and especially when we have this global economy, right, where you can just ship things from wherever, and the environmental impact is also like secondary. So it's a very intertwined issue, and it was surprising to me as well that fishes were a key ingredient in chicken food. So it's the deeper you go, the more trees there are, as they say. So it becomes very complex very quickly. But so just to kind of like answer your question, for us, it's mainly focused on vitamins and minerals. So that obviously typically is, let's say, has nothing to do with like, animal byproducts, but that also means that we cannot displace other ingredients just by adding more minerals. I'm not sure what it is in the case of fishes. I know that, it's very strange, but sometimes they even keep carnivorous fishes, right, in farms. So which means that you, by definition, need to farm other fishes just to feed those fishes. So it's very complicated, but I think it's just there's just that far that you could go by fortification. I mean, it has to be like a global kind of supply chain solution, right? And we're also seeing that, right? We're seeing initiatives that are focused on making sure that the welfare requirements are aligned across countries, and I think that's also very important for such things as feed ingredients. So it's a very relevant topic as well for chickens. But happy to hear that you had the chance to talk to the people from Fish Welfare Initiative.
Yeah, and have there been any successes in this year that you'd like to discuss? I think cost effectiveness definitely sounds promising, and it would be great if you could elaborate more on that.
Sure. So this year, I think we've been mostly trying to learn about, the farmers and really connect with learning about their needs and of course seeing what challenges and barriers they see, right? Because for us, we kind of want to get as close to the beneficiary, so the hen, as possible. And obviously the next step is the caretaker, essentially. So if the caretaker sees that there's a barrier, then probably that intervention or whatever will not be implemented. So we really wanted to learn about that, and we're definitely seeing that despite the fact that there is a knowledge gap on welfare and farm practices, the farmers are very willing to learn. I think that was very motivating for me. They're very much interested in improving. They're willing to attend workshops. They're willing to get advice and learn from each other. So that's, I think, very promising. But yeah, in terms of let's say charity work as well, we've been collaborating with a university who are leaders on welfare and one specific topic in hen welfare, which is heel bone fracture. So it is when key ingredients or key nutrients are lacking and the bones of the hens become weaker due to the fact that so much calcium is used up for eggs. So then they experience keel bone fractures. It's a bone right here on the chest of the hen, and it could happen due to collision. It could happen due to many factors on the farm. But essentially, the weakening of this bone and the fracture is obviously very painful, and it's a chronic illness because it takes many weeks to heal, and then we're even seeing like repeat fractures and one hen experiencing several fractures throughout her lifetime. So that's very concerning. But yeah, we're happy to have the opportunity to get advice and collaborate with the university who have expertise in this field. And we have been trialing something with them, intended more for the global north. So like intensified cage-free facility. So more like multiple level aviaries. It's a cage-free facility, but where you have like a tower where the hens kind of can climb instead of just having one level. So that's, yeah, let's say the intensified version of cage-free. And yeah, we tried to look into a dietary intervention there. It unfortunately doesn't seem very promising. So that just comes to show that there's still quite a lot of uncertainty, and that's why we're happy to have collaborators that can test it at like controlled settings, really to understand what works and what doesn't before rolling something out and risking the welfare of millions of hens. So we kind of took the precautionary approach to this, and I think it's still the right call, even though we might seem to be moving a bit slower. But I think it's we're just at a situation where we just want to make sure that the kind of outcome is net positive for the hens.
Yeah, and one of the shortcomings was the issue of split feeding trials. What was the main purpose of it, and why do you think it didn't work?
Yeah, so this is exactly what I mentioned, the split feeding. So essentially, just to kind of like break it down really quickly, it's throughout, well, in normal commercial facilities, you would get the hens being fed several times a day. So let's say it's 7 or 8 times, right? There's a conveyor that delivers feed throughout the barn. And typically how it's done is that the same meal or the same feed is delivered throughout the day. So what split feeding means is that most of the, let's say, calcium in this case is delivered in the evening shift. So let's say the last 3 feeding rounds would have more calcium. And this was intended so that the hens who typically lay or form the egg in their bodies throughout the night, but obviously sleep and cannot ingest more calcium, that they would have enough calcium in their bloodstream for that egg to form, instead of kind of like leaching it out from existing tissues. So the idea was that, and it was something that was trialed before, but with older hens. So in the US, 20 or so years ago, they were testing it as a way to kind of extend the production cycle, right? So to make sure that the hens lay for a longer time, because they were seeing that they were facing these bone skeletal issues due to the fact of nutrients being leached out. So it worked for that, but was not cost effective for them. But that's where the idea kind of originated, and our collaborator from the University of Bern, Dr. Toscano, he brought it forward and thought that this is a promising intervention that could be perhaps done at the early stage of the hen's development, to kind of like as a preventative way, not like a treatment at the end to kind of boost health, but instead as a preventative way. But yeah, it didn't work out. We saw that the hens experienced digestion issues, which obviously led to poor nutrient absorbance, and of course in the end it was, well, at best a neutral effect, but it might even had a negative effect, because of course young hens are very susceptible to health issues. So they need that strong nutritional basis to really absorb and develop tissues, and especially the skeletal system. So there was a kind of like a misalignment, I guess, in the end of the nutrition needed and nutrition provided. And we're in the process of consulting with third-party nutritionists to try to get a better sense for it. But it just comes to show like something that seems so straightforward, so simple, so intuitive, right? Like the hen needs more calcium at night. Let's give her more calcium at night, and then it doesn't work out and backfire. I think that's something that's really surprising. And of course, just to kind of reiterate, I'm just happy that it's tested at a low volume, let's say at low scale, right, with a commercial farm, but just one, and that it simply doesn't spread out uncontrollably when it has such a potential of negative effects on the hen.
Yeah, and what would you say is the biggest challenge for healthier hens at the moment?
So for us, I mean, it was a bit unexpected, but in the end, funding is kind of like the biggest challenge of all. And I think many groups in the space are experiencing that, unfortunately. With all kinds of philanthropic changes recently, we're definitely seeing that the growth in the movement is stifled a bit for this year and probably next. And unfortunately, some developing regions are getting kind of like the brunt of it, right? Because we, like in Africa or in Latin America, some parts of Asia, there's not that strong of a movement just yet. And I believe that more support should be given there to kind of like, accelerate and boost the movement there. But it's definitely also sensible to kind of just support the organizations that do work and show effective results to keep that momentum going. So it's a tricky call. I definitely, well, in a sense, I'm happy I'm not an funder, and I don't have to make these really difficult decisions. But in the end, I think what kind of unites us all is to find those cost-effective ways to really improve the welfare at scale, of course. So for us, it was a really bad timing, because obviously we're too small to have that traction of big organizations, but we're not funded well enough to get that traction. So it was like a catch-22 essentially, where we were kind of stuck in at the bad time. But in either case, I would say that was a limiting factor, of course, for us. And since we were quite I mean, we were small in the beginning, and really let's say took our time to be careful around these topics. So maybe that kind of set us back as well a bit. So just kind of like moving faster and having that safety of the funding was just kind of missing, because obviously at the end we decided to scale down, and just quite a lot of our time was spent towards fundraising, which could be, I would say, spent a bit better on the field, or just testing some of these things out. So bad timing, but we're happy that we could have tested some of these things, and we still continue to fundraise and try to test some more until the end of summer, when we'll do like a reevaluation point and see how we go forward there.
Yeah, and do you mind telling us how your timeline looks like? What is Healthier Hens up to in the coming future? Any exciting new projects?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, we've decided to scale down, and then so we have until, let's say, September or so 2023 to fundraise for several exciting, let's say, projects that we want to test and pilot in Kenya. Obviously, that depends on whether we get enough funding or not. We have prioritized those initiatives, and have come up with some contingency planning for what to do if we can't get that funding. So essentially, it also kind of like surrounds the topic of whatever happens to Healthier Hens. We want to make sure that whatever we try, or whatever we do or build, be it in Kenya or internationally, is transferable, right? So that it has like a long-lasting impact. And I think we've been able to connect with many stakeholders in Kenya who are interested in welfare, and we have some projects that could really help, you know, the region, let's say, to get either better data on actual welfare, or to build up a bit of capacity so that, you know, it's possible to better assess welfare on farms, things like that, more like structural things that we hope we could last. And, you know, whoever would take the baton next would have like a stronger, at least, foundation. So yeah, and then, you know, that's roughly what we're aiming for, something that, you know, however it ends up for us, could be used for other organizations or on the ground, or someone upcoming and new who will try some other initiatives. So yeah, that's why also we focus now quite a lot on reporting, making sure that everything that we did is you know, shared within the community and can be used by others, because of course there's still quite a lot of lessons learned and yeah, just know-how from practical experience on the ground. So that's kind of like, yeah, what we're focused right now: fundraising and making sure that we report well and, you know, inform anyone else who's involved, kind of like transferring that knowledge. And then of course, yeah, as I mentioned, we have those couple of mini projects in mind. If that goes well and the funding situation changes a bit, then we do have that kind of like turning or pivoting point of our existence, which would be the pilot testing of a feed fortification intervention in Kenya. So if we get to kind of get there, then that would kind of provide, you know, the initial data that's needed on actually evaluating how cost effective is this, how big of an improvement or small in welfare it results in. And that would then be a turning point saying, okay, do we scale this, or is this like, you know, should the philanthropic limited resources be spent better on another initiative?
Yeah, we talked a lot about Healthier Hens, and I wanted to talk a little bit more about you. And my first question is, what got you started in animal welfare?
Thanks so much. Yeah, so it's been quite some years by now, I would say. So initially it was, I would say, well, I would kind of attribute it to conversation to people, right? So even like, even though I myself grew up on a farm, you know, when I was a child, I would never have these thoughts, right, about welfare and things. I would really connect with the animals and have like a good relationship, but I would never, like, it would never occur to me that, you know, animal welfare is a thing, because obviously it was not like a topic at school. You know, it was something that's, yeah, strangely novel. So whenever you know, I got later on to talking with people who are, for instance, you know, they've changed their dietary habits, or they've, for instance, excluded all kind of like exploitative activities with animals from their lifestyles, that got me thinking. And I was like, wow, that's so strange, you know. It's unfamiliar for me. But then, yeah, at some point, by having more of these conversations with inspiring people who are, you know, really living according to their values, taking hard decisions, especially socially, as they can be often, it kind of clicked. And then I also, you know, I kind of saw it, right? It was like a paradigm shift. I just saw that there is such a big disconnect between how we treat even certain animals compared to certain other animals. It's just, you know, the whole concept of like speciesism or carnism, it was like, it made so much sense now when it was like, it had a term and definition, and it just, yeah, it made so much sense. So ever since then, I was kind of like volunteering with different NGOs, trying all kinds of different outreach activities and different approaches, you know, to animal rights, to animal welfare. So, but also kind of coinciding with that, a couple of years later, I got exposed to the effective altruism community. And that got me thinking, you know, that, oh, it might be that, you know, some initiatives are better than others, be it, you know, just because we have those limited resources. Or, for instance, you know, why should I prioritize like my local shelter over like a huge charity that's creating amazing impact over somewhere else? So all these kind of questions popped into my mind, and then I was seeking more, let's say, more, yeah, evidence-based or more data-driven volunteering opportunities. That got me into volunteering for Faunalytics. I think that was very exciting, really just kind of translating scientific knowledge into the community and empowering essentially animal advocates. So that was very interesting. And then, one thing led to another, and I was just keeping searching for how can I spend more of my professional time towards animal welfare as a cause area. And yeah, so it happened to be that charity entrepreneurship were running a incubation program where animal welfare was one of the big aspects, and I was, yeah, this is exactly what I want to do, and I was quite agnostic when it came to animal welfare ideas. I found them very interesting. There was interesting data, things that were not tested before, right? Novel things that could have huge ripple effects, positive ripple effects on welfare for millions of animals. So that was, yeah, it was just so exciting. And I thought that, wow, there's people who are actually doing their research. They're looking into what could be cost effective, and yeah, organizing an incubation program to really kickstart something new. It was, yeah, it was very exciting.
Yeah, and what does a day in the life look like?
Well, since we're quite a widely dispersed remote team, it typically looks like me being at the laptop, really. I mean, that was also one of the challenges, right? Because so for instance, my co-founders, Isaac is in California, Kiki is in Nigeria, and I'm kind of like London, Europe-ish. So that was pretty okay. But then we had some interns who were from India and then one in Hawaii. So you can imagine the time zone difference was global. So just, yeah, just meeting each other at be it EAG events or, during country visits, that was something to look forward to. And I hope we had the resources to do it more, because that's just so inspiring and just kind of boosts the motivation right away, even though you're so familiar to the face, having seen it on Zoom for so long. But just meeting in person is just so great, especially when you do something that you care for. And yeah, it just has that intrinsic motivation. But yeah, so essentially the day just looks like a bunch of meetings, quite a lot of spreadsheets, and as I mentioned, nowadays we're reporting quite a lot of stuff. So just writing, making sure that we can transfer some of that knowledge. Also reaching out to other organizations, discussing on what's happening in the field of animal welfare. Quite a lot of conferences, of course, be it through effective altruism or even animal welfare. There are some coming up. So yeah, I would say that's roughly it. Yeah, I hope that answered the question. I mean, I can elaborate on some things.
No, absolutely. And do you have any advice for anybody who wants to work in animal welfare, especially the science related area?
Mm. Yeah, so if you have the opportunity, I would definitely expose myself to some of these organizations that already exist, right? To just kind of get a feel for it, because it might be just different from what you imagined, in a good sense or in a bad sense. So I think just if you have the capacity, volunteering some of your time in some of these recommended charities, that would be my first approach. And then, of course, there are, let's say, levels that you can take it, right? You could meet some of the people at gatherings or conferences that are near you. You could also, of course, take up some of these internship opportunities, be it during the summer or the winter. That's also really helpful to both kind of develop career capital in animal welfare in the space, or also build up connections. I know that animal charity, not evaluated, wait, I forgot, animal advocacy careers, yes. There's so many organizations nowadays. They have really great courses, introductory courses for different aspects or different career paths within animal advocacy. So that's pretty cool. And then if you're kind of thinking of let's say you're more on the food technology side, right? There's also great organizations there like GFI. There's also, you can also take a course within alternative proteins or stuff. So really you can test yourself in many of these different areas, or the list goes on. Like if you're more into IT solutions and kind of the AI sphere, right? There's even The vegan hacktivists, they also do a lot of different work for the different organizations, kind of like enable them with technology. So that's, yeah, it's just so exciting at the moment because there's so many opportunities, really. But, you know, kind of like heads up that competition is also really high. Like there's many people who want to be involved. It's great for the movement, right? But at some point, yeah, it becomes constricted also by the opportunities, not just the talent. Because, yeah, I'm just happy to see there's so many people involved and wanting to get into the space. So, yeah, just you know, encouraging people to be bold. Just reach out if you see an organization that you like. Just reach out. I'm sure they will at least you know, share what other organizations are looking for people if they are not at the moment. And yeah, it just seems that that's kind of like the vibe of the movement. Everyone's really helpful. Everyone wants you to find that space and you to grow as an advocate. So definitely reaching out in one way or another, which is more comfortable for you, is kind of the first step.
Yeah, and do you have any thoughts on anything we haven't covered yet? Anything you wish you were asked?
um, nice one. Let me think. Not sure. I mean, there's, you know, just so many things. I don't want to, yeah, I don't want to bore your audience. Maybe you can comment on who typically watches or like listens to these, and then maybe I can tailor something.
Yeah, so you know, people in the effective altruism space who watch it, and then also like people who have a debating background and want to learn more about animal welfare. I mean, a lot of people.
Yeah, yeah, all right. Um, all right. Well, I don't know, like for people from the EA community, I feel that obviously you can find so much on the forum, probably too much at some point, right? It's just crazy. But I think, yeah, I think just getting that opportunity to talk with different initiatives, different projects and organizations is something that's very interesting. I'm happy that we have this opportunity, you know, be it through like events organized by CEA or someone else, to really engage with these communities and other ideas, really. So yeah, I just think that's kind of like the silver lining, that we have this strong community and we have opportunity to grow, but that kind of like EA umbrella allows us to challenge things, allows us to be brave and question what should be done, what should be continued, what perhaps doesn't make that much sense anymore. So I think that's, yeah, it's a very interesting combination, right? Of daring, of reason, of community. I think it's, yeah, I think that's a very unique spot that we are in, and I hope it yeah, just grows more of these successful initiatives. Um, yeah, I was thinking about something else too, but let me just figure it out. Yeah, too many things, Karthik, to share. I mean, I'm happy also for people to reach out. You know, if there's anything that you'd like to learn about what we've been trying or struggling with, or you know, considering, definitely feel free to do so. Be it on the website or anywhere else. You can also catch us at some of these events. I don't know who's attending tomorrow, actually, EG or somewhere else. So you can see us there and discuss some of these things, because obviously we're always open to hear different perspectives, and especially the challenging parts, right?
Yeah,
Oh, I remember the second topic, if we have still some time.
absolutely.
Yeah, so one of the things that I think is well, perhaps not like missing in the community, but I think definitely kind of deserves a shout, is kind of like the mental well-being, or you know, self-care of all the people involved. And especially I think it's important for people entering the space. You know, typically when we kind of enter a new field or new, you know, area that we really care about, it's so personal, it's so emotional, and it can be very difficult to not find that like ultimate super effective way to do things straight away. So I think just kind of like watching out for each other and ourselves is something that's often, well, not necessarily frowned upon, but definitely not our nature just yet, and I think it should be, because yeah, in the end it's us, it's the people who care, who are brave enough to kind of like put in the hours and risk it for someone else, right? I think that's worth cherishing and saving kind of like the most. So I think we should, yeah, just make sure that we kind of, yeah, support each other and just keep on track, because you know, the only way to kind of achieve lasting impact is through perseverance, through resilience, through just keeping doing what we do best. So I think, yeah, that's something that I wanted to kind of mention, because obviously it doesn't come up when you Google healthier hens. So it's not just about the hens, it's also about the people behind it, because yeah, as things stand, we do need more and more people, and you know, people who are there for a long time to really make a change.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lucas, for those thoughts. And I will say that I learned a lot about Healthier Hens, and I'm very, very excited for the upcoming work, and how much it's going to help improve the welfare of egg-laying hens on all hens, basically.
Yeah,
And thank you so much for your time and for all that you do for animals, Lucas. It was a genuine pleasure getting to talk.
lovely to talk to you, Karthik. Thanks so much for reaching out, and I definitely now will check out some of your shows before as well, just to see, you know, as I mentioned, to learn from each other. So thanks so much. Have a great time, everyone, and I hope to see you somewhere at some point.